Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are out here at the box beds and it is finally time to plant our onions. Today is Tuesday, March 21st. We've came through a week of freezing temperatures. The coldest we got here, I believe, was 22, 23 degrees, but down at the valley below me, it got down as low as 16, 17 degrees. You see behind me here, I've got my row covering on the garlic, so hopefully the garlic made it pretty well. Don't know what kind of impact we've had on our fruit trees, the peaches and apples yet, but anyway, only time will tell for that. Today what I'm going to do, you see I've dumped some more rabbit manure in here. I'm going to go through here, I'm going to till all this up one more time, I'm going to level it out, and then I'm going to lay out my rows for my onions. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm going to go get the tiller out, make sure it's gassed up, everything's ready to go, and the next thing you're going to see is probably going to be me tilling, and then I'll walk you through the next steps as far as how we actually go through planting our onions. All right, well, let's get this tiller started up. Remember, there's a process you got to go through here. You got to choke it, prime it, turn the switch to on. First try, how about that? All right, get this thing chopped up and get this tilled in. All right, so that's box one chopped up. You see here, there's still rabbit fur from where we cleaned out Molly's nesting box. Anyway, you also noticed probably that I had some other stuff here on top of this before I started tilling it in, and that was some potassium. Any of your tuber root style vegetables, onions, potatoes, turnips, that bird nearly took my head off, all that sort of stuff, they require a lot of potassium. So I supplement this not only with the rabbit manure, but a lot of potassium. So this is tilled up, distributed really well. You can see the rabbit manure all through it. I mean, this is super, super rich. It's not going to burn anything up, but it's a very good fertilizer. That's very natural. So I'm going to go get me a garden rake. I'm going to level all this up, and then I'm going to start laying off my rows. All right, so I'm just going to use this garden rake to just run through here and just kind of quickly level this out. I'm missing my other rake. I'm going to have to do a little bit of searching to try to figure out where it went to, but because this is a shorter handled one. But anyway, I'm just going to roughly smooth this out because I'm going to come back through in a minute. I'm going to lay rows off. You may be wondering, why did I wait till today to plant my onions? Well, obviously, you know, I looked at the forecast and saw we were going to have really cold weather for the past week, and these onions are somewhat sensitive. When I called Dixondale Farms, which is where, if you've seen the other videos, that's where I get my onions from. When I called them and asked what the sensitivity of these onions are, they told me they can handle temperatures down to about 27 degrees. Well, here, you know, we got down to, I think I said 22, 23, 24 degrees, and down in the valley below, they got down in the teens. That would have fried these onions, and I know that too because we had that happen last year. I planted a little too early. We got down to 17 degrees here, and it fried my onions, and it took them several weeks to recover from that. So because of that, they were stunted throughout the rest of the year. All right, so I've just kind of laid this out or leveled this out here now. Oh, get back to why I'm planting now. So the forecast for the next 10 days, and I realize, no offense to any meteorologists out there maybe watching, but I realize a lot of times they can't tell you what it's going to do this afternoon. So trying to rely on a 10-day forecast is, you know, kind of a shot in the dark, prayer in the wind kind of thing. But it shows that we're going to be in basically upper 30s to 60s for the next 10 to 14 days. That's really good because that's going to allow the roots of these onion plants to really develop, go down, and if we do happen to have another cold snap come through, the root structure will already be established and there will be a better chance of the onions surviving if they get that 10, 12, 14 day grow period before we have another cold snap. You never know. We may get one before then, and I may be really regretting this decision. But in the past, like I said, today's March 21st, when we lived in town and we lived in the west side of town where a lot more heat is retained, I was able to plant my onions out there the first week of March because it always warmed up faster out there, and you had so much heat retained from the roads and all the buildings that it didn't get as cold as it does here. A lot of times here we're several degrees colder, especially down in the valley, than parts of, say, West Knoxville or downtown Knoxville, for example. Okay, this leveled out, and I'm going to start laying off the rows here. The way I'm doing this, all right, so the next thing I got to do is I got to lay off my rows. And the way that Dixondale Farms recommends you do this, and we've done this for years except for last year, and it ended up biting us in the rear end in the long run, is they always recommend laying out hills and kind of valleys, or hills and troughs down between. And what you do is you put your onion in the high spot, and then in the low trough is where you're going to add your water on a regular basis, and if you want to supplement with fertilize. As the onions mature, they need a relatively high nitrogen to grow the green top, and then what's going to happen is that onion is going to suck the energy out of that green top to develop the bulb at the bottom. So that's where the rabbit manure is going to come in. That all the nitrogen from the rabbit manure ought to help develop a really good green top. The potassium that I added to begin with, it should help with establishing really good root growth. So that way the more roots you have, the more nutrients the plant's going to be able to pull in from the ground anyway, from the soil. So I'm hoping that the combination of those two is really going to work the way it has in years past. But I'm going to go through it. I'm going to start laying off some of these hills and valleys, and you'll see what we're doing here. So I'm just going to start on this end, and you want your hill to be about 4 or so inches across. And I'm going to just kind of lay it out roughly here, and then I'm going to come behind, and then I'll start working from the other direction to kind of create more of a valley. And I'm going along this edge because if I do this, then I can put a row of onions down this edge, and I can get an additional row in, as opposed to if I try to start from, say, like the middle somewhere. So just working this in. Once I get my basic row laid out, I'm just going to go behind and just kind of tap it down a little bit to try to hold its shape. And this is just a trial and error kind of process because you have to go back and modify it. Now I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to drag this way, and I'm going to build my next hill. Usually I try to make my trough between the two hills be about 6 inches or so across, okay? So I've laid off that trough. Now I'm going to start laying off this hill. And as you can see, some of the dirt does start to fall back into the trough. As it settles and compacts, I will have to come behind, and I will have to do this over the next few weeks, and then eventually it will take its shape and it will hold its form throughout the rest of the season, basically. But this is just kind of how you get it started. Once again, switch back to this side, and I'll bring you back here in a minute and show you the finished product here when I get done with it. All right, so just touching this up a little bit, finishing this up. And I don't know if you can see that really clearly or not. I'll get a close-up of it here in a minute just to show you. What I've got now is I've got 5 hills and 4 valleys running down the sides, or in between the hills. Typically what I do is the onions that don't grow as large, like the red onions, for example, I put them here on the outer edge because those hills are not as big typically, just because of the way I have to lay them out in here. The bigger onions, the yellow Spanish and the candy, for example, I'm going to put them in the middle rows because they're bigger, there's more available good soil beneath them, so it allows those to pull the nutrients out of the center of the bed, and they're going to grow bigger. The onions that are going to be smaller to begin with, They're not going to have as much of a root structure typically. The bulbs aren't going to be as big just because they don't grow that big. So I don't need 6 inches of clearance on this outside edge of the bed. I can get away with 4 inches because the bulbs typically only grow to be 3 or 4 inches anyway. So I'm going to do the same thing with the bed down here. Actually, I think before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and come in here and I'm going to start showing you how I set these onions out, and then I'll do this bed down here at the end and come back and kind of show you the finished product. But well, here's our onions. If you remember, whenever I showed you whenever they first arrived, they were really short. They had brown tops. Most of them were probably only about, I'll say, that long. I told you in that last video that what I was going to do was I was going to fill this up with water, and I was going to set these in the basement because I knew the cold weather was coming, and I figured it would be a while before I could put them out. They have all now established really good root growth. They've nearly doubled in height, so they've got a jump start on the growing season. I'm going to go through now, and I'm going to start with the red onions. Like I said, I'm going to put the red onions down the outside edge. I'm going to probably start with these red wings, and then after I get the red onions set, I'm going to space these at about 4-inch spacing. When I put the white onions out in the middle, they're going to be closer to a 6-inch spacing, just because they have the tendency to grow into a bigger bulb, and they have a bigger top, and you need that airflow to go through. So I'm going to start going through here, putting in these red onions, and then we'll come back a little bit later. Start off with the red wings. Okay, now just lay those there for a minute. And when you're planting these, I like to go through and kind of selectively pick out the bigger plants to start with. And all you're going to do is you're just going to take it and you're just going to push it down just, an inch or so. You don't really want it very deep into the soil. And even though that was a lot smaller plant than this one, when it's all said and done, they're both going to end up producing a onion that's probably going to be about the same size. There's, I haven't seen a correlation before in a larger onion plant producing an actual larger onion at the end of when the summer harvest time comes. I'm going to keep working my way down through here, sticking these in about every 4 inches. If you end up running out of room at the end and you've taken up all of your available space, then what I will do a lot of times is I will go back and I will fill in and put onions here in the void between the 4-inch spacing, because it never fails that sometimes you have some that just don't quite take, and they may die or something happens and they're not going to fully mature. Well, then I can come along and either I can pull them out, or I can pull the dead ones out, or I can come pull them and use them as a green onion and cook with a green onion or eat it with a salad or whatever. So you don't have to let all of them grow into a bulb if you don't have the room for it. All right, so we've got the red onions put in there. Now I'm just going to work down the middle rows and do the exact same things now with the candy onions. Like I said, I'm going to space these a little bit farther, probably 5 to 6 inches apart. I typically get like 6-inch candy onions, or 5-inch candy onions. I will occasionally get a couple of 6-inch candies, but typically about the average size we get here is about a 5-inch candy onion. So just work my way through here, just snugging it down into the soil, kind of packing around it a little bit just to hold it in place, and just working my way on down. This is usually the job that the kids do, but they are not available right now, and we've got rain coming in this evening, and I need to get this done before the rain gets here so the plants can benefit from the rain. So I'm having to try to do my best to get this done. All right, so I've finished out planting in the hills, and I've got quite a few more of the red onions here left. And what I'm going to do too, I'm going to finish this hill out with the red onions. Even though I've got candy, I've got 2.5 rows of candy. I'm going to do another half row here of the red, and then anything I got left over, I'm actually going to stick down in the ditch here. And what I'm going to do there then is I'm just going to let those grow up, and I'm just going to eat them as green onions is all I'm going to do. You may see one that comes up and starts doing really well, and I may choose to kind of let it go a little bit longer and see if it'll turn into a bulb. But for the most part, that's where I'm going to be watering my onions. As the spring progresses, this is going to pack down I'm going to have to come out and weed it, and I'm going to do what I can to aerate it in between the onions. But these troughs are where I'm going to add water. And basically what I do is I bring a bucket full of water, and I just add it by the cupfuls down this trough. And what happens is then your onions and the roots coming down from these hills is pulling the water out of the trough area. So if I put onions in the trough, at some point they're going to be in the way of me watering and trying to get water to the bulb onions. So that's why I go ahead and put them there. And then when the heat of summer happens and I'm actually having to start watering, by that time I have already started pulling my green onions and eating them, and then the troughs are open around that point. Usually I don't have to start really watering the onions here until mid-May, because we usually get regular rain here in April and May. So I don't normally have to water this at all. I just get enough water from the rainfall, and I'm not having to add any water to it. Now, we may have a drought this year, and I may find myself in a bad situation where I'm having to try to water. But typically that is not the case. I'm just going to carry on through here, finish out this row, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to stick some into the trough area, and then we'll be done with this bed for today. Well, that's going to do it for this first bed. Now that I've went through this one, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little experiment this year. I'm going to stop here with this bed today. I'm going to wait until after this rain comes. I'm going to go ahead and till this one and have it ready. And then I'm going to wait till after the rain comes, and I'm going to plant the onions in the damp soil as opposed to in this mostly dry soil. And it's probably be another 2 or 3 days, so it's not like there's going to be a couple week delay. But I'm just going to try to experiment and see if it's better to plant the onions, for my own future reference, if it's better to plant the onions in this dry soil that I waited to let dry to till, or if it's better to have the soil ready and then go ahead and put the onions in while the soil's still wet to try to promote the root growth early on. So I think I'm going to do that for today. I'm just going to stop where I'm at. I lost count of how many onions I put out in this bed. Between the bulb onions and the green onions, there's probably, green onions being the ones in the trough, the ditch area, I probably got, I'm going to say 150 bulb onions, maybe not quite that many. Let's say 130 bulb onions in here, and maybe 40 or so green onions. So we'll see how this turns out. Like I said, last year it got stung by a really late, really cold freeze that got down to 17 degrees. There's nothing like that in the forecast anywhere for the next 10 to 14 days. I will probably go ahead and prep this bed for a row cover, just because any additional heat you can maintain in here, the faster these are going to grow and establish that root structure to really help them overcome any kind of crazy thing that may come at them weather-wise. So, plus the high winds up here on top of the ridge, that tends to do a lot more damage to my onions than heavy rains or freeze often is, because I'm exposed to the high winds coming in across the valley. A lot of times it'll blow my onions over. So if I can cover it and get these roots established to give them a little bit more stability, let them pull more moisture and nutrients in, then I think it's going to overall just help the life of the onions. So I think that's going to be it for this video today. I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did over here. I'm just going to wait a few days and let that soil get moistened from the rain before I try to put the onions out. I hope you like this video. Drop a comment, leave a question. I'll do my best to answer it if I know the answer. And if you haven't yet, I ask that you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell if you want to be notified every time we upload a video. And I just thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informative, and I wish you a wonderful day, and God bless.